Guys, it's Boxing Gossip here. Hope everyone's doing well. Today I'm recording a little bit of a David Price special. I tried to do a little video on his fight that occurred the other week when I was away on holiday, but I couldn't get it to upload due to internet issues. So rather than putting that up delayed, I thought I'd record a new one and do a more general overview as the David Price situation as I see it, as opposed to specifically on one particular fight. First, I'll begin by stating the obvious. David Price is a threat to anyone in the division. He's 6'8", he's got huge power. He's somewhere between 17 and 20 stone, depending on what he weighs in at. He is a threat to anyone. David Price has a puncher's chance in any fight in the heavyweight division. David Price has a chance of beating Anthony Joshua, Vladimir Klitschko, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, because he is that big and he carries that much power. You can't completely rule him out of any fight. However, what I'm going to focus on in this video is the realistic element. Whilst we can't rule David Price out of winning these fights because of his power, what chance do we actually give him and where do we see his career going? For the same reasons I say he's got a chance in those fights, David Price clearly gets by at a certain level. Being 6'8", being 19 stone, having the power he has, means he is going to get by beating a certain class of heavyweight. And I mean, he's got some schooling as well, David Price. Let's not forget he is an Olympic bronze medalist. So the kind of guy we saw him fighting the other day, Peslov, I think his name is, a security guard from the Czech Republic, David Price is going to beat guys like that. He's got the size, he's got the power, he can dominate them, he can hurt them. He's going to get by at some level. But what's actually quite interesting, and I've just done this before recording this video, is to actually remind ourselves of David Price's best career wins. Because I think Price is sometimes viewed as a Euro level contender. Now, if I were to ask you, who are David Price's 3 best wins? What would you honestly say off the top of your head without typing them into BoxRec? Because I actually sat down and worked out who his 3 best wins are. And I've got to say, it doesn't make for the most impressive reading. I say David Price's best win is actually Audley Harrison. His second best win, in my opinion, is Sam Sexton. And his third best win is either John McDermott or Andre Parler. And Parler actually put him on the floor in that fight. So it's interesting when you actually look back at this. David Price, he seems to be talked about more in the Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Derek Chisora type camp, as opposed to the Hughie Fury, Gary Cornish, David Allen type camp. And what I'm getting at is Price does not have as impressive a resume as you would suspect, given the amount of conversation about him in the heavyweight division. I mean, I have to say, has David Price even beaten a British title level fighter? I mean, I guess we could be a bit flexible and say Audley Harrison, even in his late 30s, early 40s, however old he was, is a British title level fighter. But, really, has Price gone out and beaten a solid British title level fighter at the top of their career? The answer to that, I'm afraid, is probably not. He's certainly never beaten a European Championship level fighter. Certainly not. And I know there's a slight controversy over the nature of his losses, given the fact that there's performance-enhancing drugs involved. But, the opponents were using performance-enhancing drugs, should I say. But you've got to say, every time he's stepped up vaguely above the British level, whether it's European level, whether it's top 20 level, he's been knocked out. So what I'm getting at is we've got a guy here who's clearly a threat to all in the heavyweight division because of his power. But realistically, the guy's best win is Audley Harrison, Sam Sexton. And every time he's stepped up above that level, he's been knocked out. It's funny actually when we talk about resume, because if you actually look at it objectively, I would say Hughie Fury has beaten a better calibre of opponent than David Price. Whereas Hughie's probably known more as an early stage prospect, and David Price, as I say, more of a contender type. But if you actually look at who Hughie Fury's beaten, Rudenko, Gwynn, Fred Cassie last time out, probably Hughie's best win. For me, Hughie Fury's resume is actually already probably stronger than David Price's. If you look at the guys that either man has beaten, certainly Derek Chisora, I'd say, has a much stronger resume than David Price. Chisora is another guy who's had his losses, but let's have it right. Chisora's got wins over Malik Scott, Edmund Gerber, Kevin Johnson. You know, I haven't really seen David Price go out and beat that level of opponent, to be honest. So, I think David Price and the calibre of wins he actually has needs to be reflected upon, because he's actually only performed for me at an English or lower level British level in terms of the wins on his resume. You know, having said that, look, Price clearly is a threat. As I say, he does have attributes and he does carry enough power to be a threat, and he can win fights. But at this stage of his career, and bearing in mind Price is no 21-year-old, you know, he hasn't gone out and actually won the fights that really signify that he actually is a threat. And my point is that whilst David Price could go out and he could knock out Anthony Joshua, he could go out and he could knock out Tyson Fury, I think that's highly unlikely. And I actually do not think he can win fights consistently at any sort of level. I think he can win the odd fight at British and European level, but I don't think he can consistently put 5 or 6 wins together. And in trying to work out the problems with David Price, I'm actually going to compare him to someone who is a top-class heavyweight, Tyson Fury. And the reason I'm going to compare him is similar physical size and obviously both well-known British heavyweights. But I've found, when I've been thinking about it, 6 different areas that for me are David Price's key weakness. The first one is a general rigidity and lack of fluidity in his game. You know, when I say lack of fluidity, I mean that in a number of ways. There's no fluidity with his movement. The guy doesn't move laterally. You know, his punches are not fluid. It looks like he's really pushing them out. He's got no ability to throw a sort of flowing combination of punches. Also, he's very stiff, robotic. He's very limited speed when he throws. You know, he really looks like he's forcing out slow punches. Now, I know he's a big guy. I know he's the best part of 20 stone. At least he was in his last fight. And you probably don't expect the lightning quick speed and fluid combinations with a guy of that size. But if you compare him to a Tyson Fury, it's actually stark, the difference in speed, the difference in how fluid they are with their work. So for me, that rigidity is a big issue with David Price. It stops him from throwing good combinations. It stops him from moving laterally. You know, a second problem, that's problem 1. Problem 2, defence. You know, Price is not an instinctive defensive fighter. He's very upright. He's got no head movement, and fundamentally, I don't believe he knows what to do when bullets are flying. Even if you look at his last fight against the security guard, the guy had a little 10-punch combination in round 2, and Price simply puts up a tight guard and doesn't really seem to have any answer. You know, he just kind of weathers the storm. He shells up, if you like, and as I say, I just don't think he's an instinctive fighter when the bullets are flying. You know, you compare him again, as I say, I'm going to compare him on each point to Tyson Fury. Fury's a guy who's bending at the waist. He's changing angles. You know, he's maybe leaning back, raising a shoulder. You know, he's making himself a very, very difficult target to hit. He's not just standing there stationary, upright, with his hands up like this. He's bobbing and weaving. You know, he's again, it relates to point 1 when I talk about rigidity. Tyson's a much more fluid mover, and you know, Price for me just doesn't really have that to his game, offensively or defensively. And both of those points kind of tie in with the third issue, which is a general lack of versatility to David Price's game. If you look at David Price, he's a very predictable fighter. You know, even the most ardent David Price fan has to go out and admit that they know exactly how he's going to approach his next fight and what he's going to do. You know, David Price is not a guy who likes it on the inside. He's not a guy with the most startling punch variety. You know, he's very predictable. He likes to fight long. He likes to fight range. He panics if someone's on his chest. And, you know, we know he sort of fights with these long, straight punches. And that's all well and good. It's good to fight in a style that suits you and suits your experiences. But again, at the top level, or even at the European level, you like to see fighters being able to adapt. You like to see fighters evolving their game and changing up their game based on what's in front of them, with the ability to cause opponents issues by showing them different looks. Again, we'll keep the Tyson Fury theme going. Fury's a guy who, you know, clearly he's 6'9", he's got the outside game, but he's a guy who can mix it up on the inside. This is a guy who can box, but also get into a brawl. This is a guy who can fight orthodox. This is a guy who can fight southpaw. This is a guy who punches to the body. This is a guy who, throws some neat inside punches and sorter punches. David Price, very, very predictable. And because he's so predictable, it's quite easy for opponents to come up with game plans as how best to fight him. Because they know he's only dangerous if the fight develops in one particular way. And we know that he's very uncomfortable if the style of the fight breaks down in a way that's not totally in line with the way he fights. So I guess those are the first three issues that I've wanted to highlight: rigidity, lack of defence, lack of versatility. There's three more, as you can see. I've made a few notes ahead of making this video. The jab is a key problem. If you're a 6'8" heavyweight who likes to fight from the outside, you have got to have a killer jab. Look at Larry Holmes, look at Vladimir Klitschko. You have got to have a jab that can snap an opponent's head back. You have got to have a jab that can keep an opponent on the outside, especially if you're uncomfortable on the inside. David Price, for me, has not got a fully developed jab. Maybe he can jab, he just doesn't. But whatever way you like it, David Price does not use that jab to its most effective. If you look at a guy like Vladimir Klitschko, he held on to a world championship belt for 10 years off the back of fighting behind the jab. And for me, David Price, he's really going to struggle given the way he fights without developing that jab. He also seems to have no real ability to hold. He's not as strong and as rugged as Vladimir Klitschko when it comes to holding opponents. And if you're a guy who can't fight on the inside, and if you're a guy who has defensive frailties, and if you're a guy who can't keep an opponent off with the jab, as we've discussed with David Price, then you absolutely need to be able to hold. And he can't do that. He doesn't seem able to shut opponents down when they get on the inside. And that's what we saw in the Erkan Tepe fight. When Tepe was able to close the reins, the fight ended. Issue number 6 is the chin. Clearly anyone can get knocked out at any stage in the heavyweight division. We're dealing with some of the hardest punches in the world. But, if you can't keep opponents on the outside, if you can't keep them off with the jab, if you can't hold them, if you can't move your head, if you can't react when someone's throwing a punch at you, you need to have an iron jaw. And David Price does not have an iron jaw. So, for me, there's a number of career-limiting issues with David Price. And at this stage of his career, even though he's recently changed trainer, I don't think he's got the ability to evolve his game. I can see, all the amateur experience he's had, 25 odd fights in the pro ranks, 23, 24 odd fights, however many it's been. He's not jabbing, he's not defending, he's not moving laterally, he's not holding, he's not moving his head. For me, the guy just isn't an instinctive, natural fighter. He's a very big guy who hits very hard, who's been schooled very well, and he does the basics right. But in terms of moving above that British level, in terms of getting better wins than Audley Harrison and Sam Sexton, he's going to struggle with all those issues that I've just mentioned that I believe into his game. Fundamentally, I think he can be outboxed by someone with more variety to their game. I think he can be KO'd by anyone who can close down the range on him. I think he's very, very predictable, and as such, I don't think it's too hard for people to come up with a game plan on how to get him beat. There's lots of fights out there people talk about against David Price. For me, Derek Chisora, maybe that's a fight I'd look at if I was David Price. Chisora's probably a guy with a lot of miles on the clock, and Chisora's a guy who can be susceptible to getting his head jabbed off and not being able to close down the range. He's not got the fastest foot speed, he's a bit cumbersome, and Price could maybe dictate the fight from range if he were to develop the jab. But the Chisora fight's also a difficult fight, because if Chisora was able to walk him down and get on his chest and fight on the inside, I don't think Price would have any way of dealing with him. Now, Chisora doesn't have the one-punch knockout power of an Erkan Tepe, but Chisora could potentially wear a guy like David Price down and wear him out if Price couldn't, keep him at the end of that jab for the entire 12 rounds of the fight. So I think that would be key for David Price, and because he's shown a lack of a jab in recent fights, that's a fight that I wouldn't be certain he'd win, although I would lean to him on. People talk about Dillian Whyte, Dave Allen. They're both unproven guys in the sense that they haven't got experience of going late in fights, and neither of them have any marquee wins on their resumes either. You know, Dillian Whyte, for me, he looked in very poor condition against Anthony Joshua. There's a chance if he showed up in the same condition, Price would be able to move around him and use his range to beat him from range. But, you know, Whyte clearly has fight-changing power, so you'd have to say he's live in that fight. But if you move above the Chisoras and the Whytes, you know, because those fights I see as 50-50s or maybe 60-40s potentially in favour of David Price. If you move to the more elite level, Fury, Hay, Anthony Joshua. You know, Anthony Joshua is the one we should talk about the most actually, because that's a fight that could well happen. I just don't see David Price really being able to mix it up with those guys. Even Hughie Fury, I think Hughie Fury would cause him too many problems with his boxing. You know, I think Chisora and Whyte maybe wouldn't have the ability to box with Price from the outside because of the size and the styles of their fights, whereas I think Hughie could maybe cause him more problems in that sense, the way he fights. But, you know, if we look at Anthony Joshua, you know, Price is so predictable, and Joshua's shown, you know, a real ability to counterpunch and a real ability to change the course of a fight with a single punch. And, you know, with David Price's predictable nature and the fact he's so upright and no head movement, and you know, the fact he's not really presenting you with an unpredictable moving target, I just think Joshua catches him. I think Joshua would be more athletic, faster, and I think Joshua just catches him and knocks him over. To be honest, if I was managing David Price, as I said, I think due to the problems in his game, I'm not sure Price is going to be able to string together 3 or 4 wins, even at British or European level. Don't get me wrong, he'll string together 3 or 4 wins, but only at journeyman level or security guard level. He won't string together 3 or 4 wins at Euro level. And I think because of that, I like David Price, I'd like to see him do well. But because of that, if I'm honest, I'd be targeting the cash-out fight. I'd be looking at 2 or 3 fights on matchroom undercards against security guards, raise his profile, get him a few wins, and then I'd try and hope that Joshua will fancy a voluntary against the domestic opponent. And, you know, try and get David Price a 7-figure payday for that fight and, you know, roll the dice. If David Price lands on Joshua's chin, the fight could be over. Price has the size, he has the power to knock out any man. But realistically, you'd have to view that as a puncher's chance only. Price can't outbox a Joshua. Price can't outbox a Fury. Price can't outbox a Hay. They'd all know exactly what he's going to do at what time. They'd all be able to develop game plans with their respective styles to hit him, to hurt him. So if I was managing David Price, if I was looking at David Price's best options, I'd be taking a cash-out fight against Anthony Joshua. I wouldn't take any risks. I'd fight 3 more security guards, get a few wins, get some momentum, get some exposure on matchroom Sky Bells, and then step in, hope to get a voluntary fight against Anthony Joshua. Try and land on him in the first round, and you know, acknowledge that you're going to get enough money that if the fight goes the wrong way, you're set up for your rest of your career. You're set up for your rest of your life financially after that. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Am I being harsh on David Price? I just don't believe the guy can reinvent himself after all of these years and all of these attempts. For me, I'm still seeing the same fighter in his last fight as the guy who got sparked by Tony Thompson. I'm not seeing any evolution. I'm not seeing any adaptation. I'm just seeing a guy who's painfully predictable and who still is not jabbing, defending. He's still not holding. He's still not offering any variety. And he's a rigid, predictable, robotic fighter. Sorry to be harsh, but let's reflect on this. Price is a big name, but his best win is Audley Harrison. And at this stage of his career, his best bet is to take a cash-out fight rather than to try and build back to Euro level again. Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, hit a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please do press subscribe.